You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're, as usual, the hosts for this show. So, now that Obi-Wan is done, and by the way, one of the things, I have to bring this up right out the gate, because I neglected to mention this during the finale, and I also neglected to just mention this during the series, but one character I was actually hoping would make a return or whatever was it Dax? The diner dude?
Dex.
Obi, yeah.
Dex. Yeah.
Because there was obviously some sort of a relationship or something in there, that they had been, I don't know if it's necessarily they had been on an adventure or whatever, but it just seemed like there was some stories there behind what they did. So who knows? Maybe that could be the basis for a season 2. I guess we'll just have to find out. But we're not here to talk about Obi-Wan. Well, at least not entirely. I mean, the conversation could lead into that, but we're here to talk about Padme and Natalie Portman. And it looks like from some sort of reliable, trusted source or something that Natalie Portman may be returning to Star Wars, which is really interesting to me. And let me just frame this way, and then we can talk about it. And then, of course, when everybody starts jumping on, we can continue. But around the time after she did Thor, she kind of went through this thing where, after she did Thor and after she did The Phantom Menace and, well, really the whole prequel trilogy, being that her background was a little bit more, I don't know, less like blockbuster films, she actually, I don't know, for whatever reason, just decided she didn't really want anything to do with all these comic book, superhero, sci-fi type of stuff, and she basically did not return for Thor Dark World. She instead just abandoned everything and started to do regular stuff. And then, of course, there's a movie that came out a couple of years ago called Annihilation that actually was pretty cool and is kind of a return to sci-fi, but it was a little bit more cerebral. It wasn't your blockbuster swashbuckling, type of a thing. So the first reports come that she's actually returning for Thor Love and Thunder. I remember back when they had, talked about that it was kind of like, oh yeah, Natalie Portman's coming back. And I don't know, I thought that was a really interesting, almost strange thing because of her attitude that she just decided, like, you know what, I'm not going to do these movies anymore. So she starts to return for Thor Love and Thunder, which I thought was okay, interesting. And it's, I've sent you stuff and everything. You've probably seen the trailers by now. I mean, she had to kind of buff up a little bit in order to play, I think in the comics they just call her Lady Thor or something like that. But, she had to basically train. It wasn't like she's just appearing in the thing. I mean, she really had to work at it, really. And so now it brings us to where we have this report where apparently some source basically came out, and the source apparently has been correct in almost, well, pretty much 100% of what's been said. So now we have this idea that she's coming back, she's playing Padme, and it's going to be in some sort of undisclosed project. So I think that the first thing that we can talk about here is, what do you think about all this stuff? And I pose this as, every week I shouldn't even say every week because we're twice a week, but every show I always do like a kickoff chat. I put a question or something in there to sort of get the chat discussion started. And I started of not even, what project do you think it is or anything like that. It's really more, do you even think that she should return to Star Wars? So let's start there.
Do I think she should return to Star Wars? I mean, I guess if you're talking about a time period in which she would be heavily featured in, then yeah. But I mean, I just feel like, I think the question is, well, I think part of the the answer to that question is, um, what are we? I mean, because I mean, what do we really need? I hate to say it like this, but what do we need her for? You know what I mean? Like,
all right, you're just gonna go right out,
yeah,
and all right. I mean,
yeah. I mean, but here's my
no,
thing.
it
Like,
makes
okay,
sense though. That question
we've seen her
actually
grow.
does. Yes.
Yeah, we've seen it. You know, we've seen her growth, much like we saw Anakin Skywalker. I mean, it happened at the same time. So we got a chance to see. I mean, we didn't get a chance to see what it's like prior to her becoming queen or what have you, which I don't think we need anyway. So, and we got that in the books anyway. Um, Queen's Peril, Queen's Shadow, all
Yeah.
that stuff.
Which
All
I
right,
mean, I have to ask. Did you ever finish that book?
let's move on. So, as the question is,
So no.
no, but here's the thing, though. It's kind of like if you're going to feature Padme, you have to do it during the prequel era, which means that it's like, okay,
Yeah, I guess it would be
what
pointless to feature
story?
her before the Phantom Menace, because even then she'd be too. I mean, she's supposed to be about, I think, like 5 or 6 years older than Anakin. Like, she's basically right in between Obi-Wan and Anakin as far as age goes. Because I think when
Yeah,
Anakin was like 9, she was like 14 or something. So she's like 5 years older. So yeah, she was only like 14 in the Phantom Menace. Do we really
yeah,
need to see, a
yeah, like an
6-year-old
8-year-old.
queen? Yeah,
Yeah, we
right.
got that. We got Leia for that. Crap. you know,
She won't be 10 forever. Stupid line. Go
right?
ahead.
Yeah, but yeah, my thing is like, okay, the only thing I can see them remotely doing is if you cover things between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. That's the only
Yep.
thing that will really make sense.
Yep. I.e. the Clone
And
Wars.
right, which we had in the animation, but then which once again, if you're going to show her that way, and you're going to show her with Anakin once again, you're going to have to de-age him, in my opinion, because if you're
Well,
showing them this much, like because you
yeah.
don't want to have some 40-year-old, what I'm saying, walking on. It
I
kind of takes you
mean,
out of it,
well, the
especially
thing,
like if you're going for a long period of time. See, when you show Anakin and Obi-Wan, okay, yeah, the little lightsaber duel thing was cool, but it wasn't the main focus. You see what I'm saying?
right.
But if you're actually trying to take a story where you have Natalie Portman and Hayden Christensen in that time period, you're gonna have to de-age them because it's gonna look weird.
Mm-hmm. I mean, well, here's the thing. So you brought up a couple of things that I was thinking of, really. I mean, on one hand, I do point out that when people talk about is it necessary or could you do stuff, because they're churning out a lot of programs and things like that that are starting to take place a little more of that time period. I mean, let's remember that even in the Obi-Wan series, right, she's been dead for a while. At least so we think.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be a little cheesy if you reverse that. We don't need zombie Padme. I mean, it wouldn't work, not to mention the fact that her death affecting Vader the way that it has, and
Mm-hmm.
the fact that they've dealt with it so much in the comics and in the novels, you can't really go back on that without serious ramifications. I mean, at that point, then you would have to reboot the original trilogy, because...
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean that's a huge part. I would just say like we don't really need this. I don't think we really need to see Padme again because I think her story is complete. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
now I could see her being featured in some things. So I don't think I don't think they should do a thing that's heavily involving Padme. However, I can see her featured. So
Well, you mean talking about like in some other person show? Almost like if she had
yeah.
popped up in, I mean, obviously she wouldn't pop up in Obi-Wan, but something like that.
Yeah, like flashback scenes, I could see that.
Well, I'm gonna give the same argument that I would give for Princess Leia, right? Because there was a lot of blowback about even recasting her. I remember, even as far back as, well, even before really The Force Awakens, when all this stuff was just talked about. But definitely after that, and this is before Carrie Fisher's death. I'm talking about. Of course, it heated up after her death, naturally, but basically the idea was, do we go back and do we tell new stories with the original characters? And if we do that when they were younger, then we're either going to have to de-age them, which would cost a bunch of money. And I think that as time moves on, because the technology is getting cheaper and easier, maybe they'll consider that. But that being said, Princess Leia and Padme as characters are both key figures during their time periods, and there's been a lot of material. You mentioned the Queen's Peril, Queen's Shadow, and then there was that third one, the final one. I can't either. I mean, what's funny is I actually bought them. I haven't started any of them yet, but I did buy them. I bought all three of them. So she's a pivotal character, and there are key things that you could bring up. There are stories that you can certainly tell that even though you can say, okay, we basically got her complete story, and especially how she relates to the other characters, you could say, well, it really isn't necessary. I mean, at this point, you would be doing two things. One, you would be doing what every hardcore fan loves, and that's filling in the gaps, right? We have the sketch, now we're going to put the colors in. But the other thing that you could do is for people who are maybe more casual or whatever, you do have this really cool character, and you sort of showed her the beginning of how she plays into this universe, and then the part that she plays at the end, right? Because it's all related to the Skywalker saga. It's like, this is how this character relates to the Skywalkers and that overall story. However, you could make the argument, and certainly the books and the comics have, is that there's a lot more story that you can tell just because you start to think, well, what would it be like to be a child queen and, having to deal with all this? I mean, we always talk about all the time about how we love political thrillers and things like that. Well, you wouldn't even have to involve the Skywalkers or anything like that. You could just focus on that part, and that's another option they have if they want to, and I'm talking about overall now. So let's just say, for instance, they want to move away from the Skywalker saga, right? They want to move away from that storyline. But at the same time, maybe you might want to do a project that doesn't completely alienate, like you want something familiar in there. So the best way to do that is to just take the characters that were introduced and that are familiar, but then, move them into something that doesn't involve the Skywalkers at all. Like I basically been talking about Thrawn. I mean, even though I guess he kind of plays that part now that they moved him into the whole Rebels thing, but, you could do something like that.
Yeah, I mean, once again, I just feel like Padme is not a character
just like,
that
nah,
we really...
but no.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying, like, I just don't think... I mean, granted, she was important, and I think we saw the value of her importance. I think that was fleshed out enough. Like, we get it. Like, we get the idea.
But again, you're talking about the importance to the Skywalker saga, though. I mean...
Well, yeah, because that's what we care about. Like, no one cares about Padme being a politician just on her own person.
Well, it really depends, though. If they have a really good story. I mean, look at all the stories that you have just in, in our earthly films, right? That are just, I mean, they're just really good stories. They're really good thrillers or whatever.
Yeah.
It's not, and that's what I'm saying. I mean, again, something has to be there. But with that character, I think that it is. I mean, I think that there's this whole other thing that you can explore. Again, it's kind of like a happy medium, right? You basically, it's familiar enough. Look, we all know Naboo. We all know that stuff.
I just think it's going to be hard to try to tell stories like that without. I mean, granted, yes, she did things without Anakin around, but it's going to be hard to kind of like tell her story without certain characters around her if you're trying to keep it away from the Skywalker saga. No different than like, okay, you and I both love Bloodline, right? We love the book Bloodline, but Bloodline still dealt with, Han. It still dealt with Luke. It still dealt with characters that we know, even them bringing up Vader. I mean, it's like, granted, Vader was dead, but you're still you're still connecting that whole Skywalker thing to it. And that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't think she can really get away from that. I think because because that's really her, I don't want to say her claim to fame, but it is. It's like, if you really think about it, like, she's really the whole source of the reason why Anakin went to the dark side in the first place. So her not being around Anakin or her not having any dealings or anything like that would be kind of weird. I think that, like I said, it would make more sense for her to pop up in other people's stories. Like, I could see her popping up in the Ahsoka series because Ahsoka could flash back, talking about like, oh, well, my master, and you can show Anakin, you can show Padme, you can show those things because Ahsoka and Padme did interact. They had, she might say, well, watch after Anakin. Like, yeah, I know, that type of stuff. So there's relevance there.
Well,
But I mean,
here's
to
my
see
problem
her,
though. I mean, I get it, and that's true. So first of all, going back to what you were saying before, I mean, I could see where you can say, okay, the problem with just having her have this like isolated, contained adventure is, on one hand, it would be too Star Warsy to bring in people that are just fans of, say, a political thriller or something, right? Like, nobody's gonna necessarily go see it because it's like, it's one of those Star Wars movies. The other problem is if you make that, it might not have enough of the familiar characters and all that to appeal to the Star Wars fans. So it's almost like you're in this limbo type period,
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I get that.
Like I said, it's weird because like really up until Phantom Menace is when we get introduced to Padme.
Right.
All right, she's queen. Even in that, she meets Anakin and Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. So it's just like, okay.
Well, yeah, the character was definitely created in service of that, right? I mean, it's in service to the greater story. But one of the things that I always admired about Lucas's storytelling, it's no different than when you take like the show Frasier. We've said this about other shows, but Frasier's the one that we say this about a lot, where you could literally take even the most like randomly appearing character in there, total side character, and you can make an entire series out of them simply because even the side characters in that show are so well written. And that's one of the things that I think is great about George Lucas's storytelling is that, yes, obviously he's bringing Padme in as a foil in a way for Anakin, right? It's part of that story. It's that character is in service to the greater story. However, there's still complexity and everything in her character and her story. So you can do that.
Yeah, I just don't see how well you're going to do that without. So using your Frasier reference, that's almost like we always say like, okay, you could do a spinoff show on Niles or something like that, right? But it's hard to do a show about Niles without talking about Daphne, Martin, or Frasier. Like, you're going like, because they're connected.
Well, you could still talk about them. I mean, that's not.
Well, no, not saying talk about them, but I mean, like, you expect to at least hear them, see them, so like, because they're so integrated. And that's the thing. Like,
yeah, but I mean, even
if you were talking about like, if you were saying like, okay, if you did a show on Shakti or something like that, I could see that because it's like that's a side character that we know of, but she's far removed. Like, you can have her on her own adventure with her own master. She's got her own struggles and things like that of becoming like that. To me, I could understand, but like Padme is so interwoven into the whole
Yeah,
Anakin.
you're just saying it's like too close, right? It's
Yeah,
too.
it's too close. Yeah,
It's
where
almost
you
like it
can't.
wouldn't make any sense. But then again, though, if you're going back, well, maybe not Queen's Peril, because I think that takes place after she meets Anakin. In fact, I think Anakin actually has a lot to do with that story. But Queen's Shadow, I remember, was kind of like a prequel type thing, you know. But see, here's where the other problem comes in with that. Again, I mean, Natalie Portman still looks amazing, and she looks roughly the same, but she is older. So, you know, how are you going to go back and tell a story when she's like a 14-year-old? You can't do that.
Yeah,
And that's
that's what
my
I'm saying. It's
problem with
almost
the flashbacks. Well, here's the other thing too. Like the Ahsoka thing makes sense, right? You can I agree, you could have her go into these other shows and do flashback scenes. And I guess you could say from a certain point of view that it would add more weight, right? So it's kind of like, well, if I'm going to have a flashback scene, let's bring back the actress that actually was there to give it a little bit more weight and more heft and everything else. It's no different than why bring Hayden Christensen back to play Darth Vader. Because if you think about it, you don't really see him except for a couple of times outside the suit, but being that he has that same walk, it's like you can actually connect those characters a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, because quite frankly, I mean, even using that whole Hayden Christensen thing, like even when he's not in the suit, it's like, okay, he's so mangled up you can't even tell it's Hayden anyway. So it's like,
well, I
half
was
the time
talking
he's like
about
floating in a bacta tank. You know
well,
what
I'm
I
not
mean?
even
But
talking about those. I'm talking about like the single flashback scene that we had. You know, you can bring that back. But see,
yeah,
but that's the point. The point is the reason why you bring that back is because you can connect the characters, you could do all this stuff, right? So if you're gonna do a flashback, you might as well bring back the actress just to give it more. But I guess what you have to really ask yourself though is, especially with Ahsoka, and this is probably the subject for another show actually, how necessary is it? In other words, is it really worth it to bring this actor back and possibly have to de-age them and do all this stuff? You know? I mean, sure, the Anakin Obi-Wan thing. So in Obi-Wan, yes, it did make sense to do that because you know, of the story they were telling.
They're so not only that, but they're so interwoven. Like once again, Anakin and Obi-Wan, like they're like Thelma and Louise. I mean, you almost can't mention one without the other because they're both.
Well, and then there's a story that they're telling too, right? Because at that time period, it's like they could have handled Obi-Wan as kind of like, here's all the desert adventures of Obi-Wan or something, but going the way that they decided to go, you at that point have to do it.
Yeah, but then it's like I said, you know, it's. I mean, another example is like Superman Lois Lane. Like you could show Lois Lane coming up as a reporter, you know, at the Daily Planet without Clark being there because she was already an established reporter before he got there. So, but we've already seen that with Padme being a queen, then becoming a senator. So we've already seen that her become established. And then she hooked up with Anakin. So now it's like, okay, we've got the complete stories pretty much.
Well,
So
and I think
like,
what you're saying is basically like, well, you told the story of what happens to her until she meets Anakin. Like we already have enough, right? Like there's no real need to expand it, and especially at the sacrifice of maybe creating a brand new story. It's like, why bother? And I think that goes back to our original thing. It's like, well, what are they doing?
The only way I can see possibly if they did almost like a Lois and Clark type thing where they did like an Anakin Padme love story talk, and you can see like because one of the big parts of their whole thing was okay, no one's supposed to know about our relationship, right? So if you did a story like a single story about them, you could kind of tell it from the love perspective of like, okay, it's taking place during the Clone Wars, and they're sneaking off. Like, okay, And we got a lot of that, like I said, in the animation. That's another thing. It's like a lot of the gaps that you would try to cover up. I mean, not cover up, but fill out, were already done in the Clone Wars. Like that whole thing with Clovis and Padme, when Anakin got jealous because he thought Clovis was trying to hit on Padme, and because he knew they used to date.
Now that's
So there
true.
was
That
whole
would have
thing.
actually been a really cool like series
Yeah,
if you
exactly.
had
If you'd
just
did
drawn that out. Yeah.
right, like a Lois and Clark type thing almost. But
Mm-hmm.
we've already seen it in the animation, the Clone. I mean, granted, if you want to do it live action, I guess you could, but it's like we kind of already know everything we need to know about those two.
Well,
I
here's
mean,
the
we
thing
know
that I
she's
think.
go ahead.
Well, I mean, so I think that the deal is that first of all, I think a lot of this has been coming up because Hayden obviously is just over the moon about coming back as Anakin and Vader and all that, and he wants to do more actually. So,
Mm-hmm.
and of course, Ewan McGregor has already stated, "Hey, I want to come back as Obi-Wan." And so
Mm-hmm.
naturally, if you get these two guys continuing to do projects together, it's like at some point it almost makes sense to come back and bring Natalie Portman into it too. The problem is though, and this is the only thing, because like you said, in the article that where we got this from, which was actually on Giant Freaking Robot, which is it's a giantfreakingrobot.com. It's another one of those. They put out a lot of Star Wars articles and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Screen Rant is really where we usually get a bunch of stuff, but we source stories. I mean, look, we're just like you guys. We read about stuff all the time, and when something comes up that's kind of cool or whatever that's worth talking about, we bring it on the show and talk about it. Much of what you were saying is brought up in this article. But my problem, and it's not, this is what hasn't been brought up, at least from what I remember. I mean, I could probably scroll down, but see, my problem is that if these guys weren't a bunch of like 40-year-olds, it would be fine. Like if this were done in like 2006, where it's kind of
10,
like, okay,
I
or
mean,
even 10, yeah, where it's not too far removed from at least episode 3.
mm-hmm.
Then you can go, okay, cool. Maybe we can make some Clone Wars live action stories as well. But it's like, yeah, it's 2022 though.
Now, it just hit me. Ouch! I know.
I was gonna say, yeah, you should have ducked.
But so you know how we were talking? I was just mentioning about the Lois and Clark thing with Anakin and Padme. Okay, I got a better one than that, and maybe this is the only way I could really see it being truly live action. That would make sense, and it would enable. It would satisfy so many people. It would satisfy fans. It would satisfy Natalie, Hayden, and Ewan. Is if you did a Vader series based off the comics. Because in the comics we see how much he flashes back and thinks about Padme. He's going about and he's finding out all this stuff. That would be a story, because now you can really get into the psyche of Vader and understand, like, okay, like,
well, that's what Hayden's been saying.
Going through.
That actually he wants that. And now if Disney were smart, and I don't really know exactly. Well, you can handle this one of two ways, because their argument would be, well, it's already been done in the comics, so we would take a lot of the continuity and everything like that, so we're not nullifying it. But I've often said what they should do, honestly, although I don't think that they would go this far, is adapt the comics. They should just take the Darth Vader comics and go, okay, we're gonna use this for the basis of a series.
Yeah, because I think, of course, what fan doesn't want to see more Vader, especially after this whole Kenobi series? Like, people just love the way that people are showing Vader now.
Sure.
And now you can show him at his full strength and stuff. Yep. So now Anakin, you can show Hayden Christensen. He could play Anakin and Vader again. I'm sure that, he'll probably be thinking about stuff with Obi-Wan. So you can kind of sprinkle Obi-Wan in there the same as you did with Padme, and then now everybody goes home happy.
We got.
But to me, that's about the only way you can do it.
Yeah, we got Voyager chatting in. Basically says, yeah, Hayden has been reading the Star Wars, the Vader comics, and likes them. You know, it's kind of funny about Hayden Christensen because he kind of checked out a little bit, you know, some of the Star Wars stuff, which I think is really funny. But ever since he got the role in Obi-Wan, he's just been all in. You know, he watched the Clone Wars, then he watched Rebels. I mean, you know, and he's been actually into it. Like, as a fan, he's been into this stuff. And so, yeah, you know, I'm sure he went back, read the Vader comics, you know, and he likes them, and he should, because honestly, the Vader comics are some of the most well-written content in the current canon, to be completely honest.
Well, see, and that's the thing is, like, you know, and quite frankly, I mean, yeah, you're gonna have like hardcore, like the hardcore fans are gonna read like everything that they can get their hands on, but the casual fans aren't. You know, the casual fans aren't gonna go out and buy comics. You know what I mean? So I think this is
unless they're comic fans. I mean, that's where it's almost like it's weird with like Star Wars, something like comics, because you just have fans of comics, right? That read all the other stuff. They may. And this goes to your point. They may not even read Star Wars because they're not into that, right? They might be like super comic fans, but they're not into Star Wars. Right. Or you might have, like you said, the casual Star Wars fan who, you know, maybe they'll watch the TV shows, they'll see the movies, maybe a book or two, and that would be it. I mean, look, I didn't read the comics for a long time. But once I started I've been like sucked in, man. I mean, I'm subscribed to like 4 or 5 of them now.
Well, that's the thing, you know, like most people, like especially who grew up with Star Wars. I mean, like, you know, late 30s, 40s, 50s. You know, it's like 60 years old. You know, they're not about to like, oh, I gotta go get the new comic. You know, what I mean, it's kind of weird at that age.
Well,
I mean, like I said, casual fans. You're we're a little bit past the casual.
Okay, well.
So
it's true. I am hosting a Star Wars show on YouTube, so I guess it would be tough for me to pass myself off as a casual fan at this point.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what I'm saying. Like the casual fans, you know, who are like that, they're not running to the comic book store to get the latest Vader thing, you know. So I could understand why that would be. This would be more appealing, and of course, like even if reading it in the comic book. We still want to see this stuff. Like,
well, that's it.
It's a different, like, you know, when we saw episode 3 or part 3 or however they want to put it, from Obi-Wan, and you know, and the first time we really see Vader, you know, I mean, he's coming in, he's force choking people, snapping people's necks, dragging them, and then he gets to Obi-Wan, and then he drags him to the. I mean, like that's like okay, because ever since Rogue One, everybody's just like, that's the Vader we wanted to see. We've always wanted to see that. And so now, quite frankly, while you still got James Earl Jones alive.
Well, I don't even know if they need him. I don't even know if they need him, man. That was not James. That was James Earl Jones's voice. But I am telling you that's AI that they were using during this series. Because he sounded way too young and clean and all that. So they did one of two things. Either they had him dubbed. Well, yeah, I know what you mean, though. But I'm just saying, I think... I'd have to look into it more, but I am pretty sure that, you know, you no longer need those. We don't need James Earl Jones. I mean, all we need is permission to use his voice. And then Voyager actually answers the question. Let's see if this chat actually pops up, though. Yeah, here we go. So Voyager says, yeah, it was AI using Reader. Yeah, because I could tell that it wasn't like a live thing, you know? And not to mention the first thing, because my coworker Doug and I were talking about it immensely after the first Vader episode, which I think was episode 3. I mean, it was like that. He sounded way too young and clean and episode. Because if you compare his actual dubbed voice from Rogue One, where he sounded kind of like a 80 or 90-year-old guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then you listen to it in Obi-Wan, you're like, whoa. And that's really what you want, because I'm so glad this technology exists, because on one hand, you're kind of like, okay, I mean, we love James Earl Jones. He's the voice of Vader, but he's just not, he can't sound, like, it's bad when the Rogue One Vader sounds old and the Return of the Jedi Vader sounds younger. But at the same time, even though a lot of guys like in the video games and stuff like that have actually done a really good job with the voice, it's just not the same as James Earl Jones's actual voice. So I love the fact that they figured out a way with AI to really use his voice, but to make it the way it was.
Yeah. I mean, and that's what I'm saying. So I think if they did that, that would be the best option if you want to really feature Padme more frequently, I would say. That would be the best medium to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. And of course, something else we haven't really talked about yet. Even though I think that it's been stated that this is supposed to be a live action return, I really wouldn't rule out an animated return, which to me would actually make a lot more sense.
But once again, like, so we're going back to the prequel era. So
I know, it'd almost be like it's like, what are you going to make a season 8 of the Clone Wars?
Yeah, like, okay, what are we doing here? Once again, with Padme,
what are we doing?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, what it would basically be, it's almost kind of like what you alluded to with that love triangle story arc. You would almost have to just write a new story that takes place during that period. Because look, I mean, the Clone Wars is pretty vast, right? I mean, the 7 seasons that we got of Clone Wars do not necessarily have to be the be-all, end-all of that time period. I mean, if they wanted to do another animated show during that time or anything like that, you could do that. I mean, obviously, you have to be a little careful, though, because the Clone Wars series actually goes all the way from the beginning of the Clone Wars to the very end. And in fact, a lot of that totally overlaps 3, more so than what we thought it would. So you do have to be careful about that. But at the same time, I mean, you could do it, right? As long as you're not breaking canon.
Yeah.
Voyager says, Padme's funeral will be in Tales of the Jedi. Now, I'm trying to remember because there's the book, but I thought I heard something about a Tales of the Jedi show. And I'm not sure if there was talk about it, but I'm not sure if that ended up being what it's going to be. So if you know, clarify that for us, because there's been a lot of things. Like, for instance, that new book, Shadow of the Sith, that's either coming out or is out. I definitely got to pre-order that or order it. It might be out. Because that actually has, from everything that I've read about it, a ton of canon stuff in it. Like, if you're kind of a more hardcore fan, it's going to be required reading. Voyager says, yes, Tales of the Jedi animated show coming out in fall this year. That's right. That's what it was. It was an animated series. If I remember correctly, that's Filoni's next show that he was putting out.
And that may be where we find Padme.
It could be. Well, I mean, we know their funeral's going to be. Right. That'd be great. Hey, could you voice your corpse? Voyager says, I started Shadow of the Sith, so I guess it is out. The audiobook is so good. I never actually considered... I have been threatening...
One of these days I'm going to do that. Yeah,
I know. I have been threatening to do it, man, ever since Christian Harloff, way back in the day, started getting them. And, him and like a bunch of other people have been going, oh, yeah, I mean, the audiobooks are great. I mean, a lot of them actually have like music and sound effects and all kinds of stuff in them. And I mean, I've been threatening to actually take the plunge, because you and I are really similar that well in a lot of ways, but one of the ways is that we both actually like reading the books and taking it in and using the imagination and things like that. But at the same time, the fact of the matter is, I mean, look at your situation. You might have actually finished Queen's Peril if it had been an audiobook.
I know, right? I listen to it every day, and I'm waiting from work.
Right. I mean, I'm just saying. So it's kind of one of those things where, and I've gotten really used to listening to podcasts and radio talk shows and stuff like that, like on the Sirius XM app and all that stuff. So I'm probably more in the mindset to do that now than I was, although I still very much enjoy reading. I mean, it might be kind of cool, and who knows, maybe Shadow of the Sith would be a good book to start that with, but it's just hard to, because I really enjoy reading a lot, but at the same time, there's also things that, because like you said, if you're listening to something and you're chipping away at it, you can multitask. You could be cleaning and listening to the thing, right? So,
right.
I mean, I guess you might be more apt to finish it. But yeah, I figured that Shadow of the Sith was going to be really good. I mean, that book, there's a lot to it. There's a lot of stuff in it, and it covers so much that where it comes to the Sith and their whole influence on everything. And I would not be surprised if they were starting to do this because of the Acolyte. Because the Acolyte's coming down. Who knows? Now, of course, something you probably won't be interested in, but they are coming out with a book based on, what's that dude from Visions? From the first episode. I keep wanting to say it's like Rodin or something. One? Yeah, that like Rodin. Warrior dude. Yeah. So they're coming out with something on him, and that's probably to warn us or warm us up for the 2023 Star Wars Vision Season 2.
Oh boy.
Yeah, well, I remember it's one of those things where we got through it. We could get through it again. I mean, hey, at least they're not releasing it like every 6 months or something. Right. I mean, by the time they release season 2, And there were some episodes that you actually genuinely liked.
That's true.
Maybe they'll do it. Now that they have something down a little bit, maybe it'll be a little bit better. At least I'm hoping. I mean, to be honest, I am a little surprised that they're doing it. I mean, I'm not, but I am. Because it just seems like, on one hand, there's endless stories they could tell. Because they're not going by canon or anything, right? So in some cases, they're even twisting stories on their side or whatever. So it's kind of like you can do that with a lot of stuff. But then on the other hand, it just seems like that could almost wear itself out. I don't know. Hey, maybe Padme will pop up in Visions.
No boy.
Natalie Portman's like in there. It's like I don't understand this at all. I don't even know what I'm reading.
Back, this is not what I was talking about.
Exactly. It's like, I was reading the script and I don't even know what this is. This is Star Wars, right?
Where's Yoda and Andy and Obi-Wan?
It's like, I don't even know. It said Padme on the contract. I don't know, but that's the thing. So I wouldn't rule out animation as a possible return. And like we said, I mean, to me, if these guys want to, it's too bad they didn't feel this way when the Clone Wars cartoon was on.
Right.
But
hindsight is 2020.
Yeah. Well, there were rumors that Hayden actually wanted too much money. And it wasn't so much that it was an unreasonable amount, really. It was just, he was the guy that played the part, right? So it demands a certain amount of cash, and they just didn't really want to budget that. So they got somebody else that was cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I think that would actually be one possible way that you can do it. Because remember that Batman series that came out where they actually had Adam West and Burt Ward voicing the characters, and they animated it kind of like the 60s TV show and stuff.
Yeah, I love
those. Were great. Those were great. And I'm sure they would have done more of them if Adam West hadn't passed away.
Mm-hmm.
Because he had just wrapped up the Two-Face one, where William Shatner played Two-Face. So, that was a really... I mean, to me, that was really cool. And they could do something very similar if they wanted to, where they could just come up with another Clone Wars era thing, but this time actually use the real voice talent. I mean, I think that would be cool. On the other hand, the way that Hayden Christensen and Ewan McGregor are talking, it's like they want to do a live action version. They don't want to just sit in a booth and, say a bunch of dialogue, right? They want to be in the thick of it and the action and swinging lightsabers and saying stuff.
Fake force pushing.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Holding their hands out.
I mean, some of that stuff has to be so silly when you're actually doing it. Especially that one in episode 3 where they're just both like this, and it's like, okay, pretend.
Not if you actually did it as a kid. If you played Star Wars as a
kid,
true.
That's true.
It comes natural.
Yeah. Yeah, and they were young enough to where...
Yeah, Ewan McGregor probably did it. But Hayden, I'm not so sure.
Well, he probably did. Because, I mean, everybody keeps forgetting that his uncle was the one that played Wedge.
Mm-hmm.
And Ewan's daughter was in Obi-Wan.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like you got
some of the death sticks.
Mm-hmm. So it's sort of like you got like 3 different, generations of Star Wars. Voyager says, a Vader series where Padme is a hallucination, figment of Anakin's imagination, etc. could work. If you think about it, it could be very creepy, psychological, like the Black Swan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or another thing that comes to mind, honestly, is Spider-Man with the Green Goblin.
Oh, yeah.
With Willem Dafoe's version of it.
Yep.
He goes on to say, I just finished Stranger Things. The hand-up power thing is even sillier than in Star Wars. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because... So I'm on episode 6 right now. I'm like halfway through. They just released episodes 7 and 8 of Stranger Things season 4 today. And each one's like a couple hours long now. So
yeah.
But yeah, and I have to say that by far this is probably my favorite season. Even though I love season 3. I mean, with that show, each season... It was almost like 24 that way, where there's no bad season. It's just that each season gets progressively better. And so there are some things where, I could see, I could definitely see in Stranger Things where some of that stuff might have been sort of silly to do. I mean, anything. Harry Potter, I'm sure they're, waving around these sticks and ridiculous, just like saying these things and nothing happens. They're just...
Right, not to post-production.
And that's it, because, and how many actors have said that? Once you see it on the big screen, it's like, oh, okay, I didn't know where they were going with that, but that's awesome. Even the music video we shot, our friend Dante, and we're having him do all this stuff. He's like, I remember he came up to me afterwards. He goes, okay, man, now that I saw the video, it's like, wow, this is actually pretty cool, because I'll be honest, I had no idea what you people were trying to make me do here. So I mean, it's one of those things that's part of being an actor and professional. You have to pretend, you have to imagination, a playtime, a certain willingness, and part of the professionalism of it is you have to sell it. You have to, I mean, when those guys, because you can imagine, it's just like, okay, action, and they're just holding their hand, at each other, and they're straining and they're pretending and all this stuff. They have to sell that there's really this power that they're pushing against. So I think that's a remarkable thing, and that's cool. And I can understand why when these guys are returning to that stuff, they're kind of like, hey, we kind of want to do more of this because it was fun. You know, in the thick of Star Wars mania, especially with the prequels, at the time getting as much hate, every single time they released one, they got more and more criticism. Yeah, at that point, they're probably like, you know what? I can't wait to get out of this thing. I can't wait to just do a normal film, no green screen, whatever. Well, you know, you come back a little bit later and you realize it was fun. Voyager. I wonder where Ronaldo is today. But Voyager says, also, isn't there that World of Worlds or something in Rebels? Yes, we brought that up. Padme's presence using something like that could also make a lot of sense. And we brought that up with somebody else. I forgot who we were talking about. Where I said, well, they could always do the World Between Worlds because that's kind of their get-out-of-jail-free card where you can do anything you want.
That was when we were talking about the sequel trilogy. We were saying, like,
yes,
they could do another
Heir to the Empire. Yes, that's what it was. Yeah. Where they could actually do the Timothy Zahn trilogy of 7, 8, and 9, and it would work because you could just say that's the World Between Worlds thing. So, yeah, certainly you can. Now, you got to be careful because the World Between Worlds, I remember that actually caused a little bit of division, too, because it wasn't 100% Star Wars-y, you know? It was... because no matter what fantasy elements you have in Star Wars, they feel organic. They feel realistic. Whereas the World Between Worlds was getting to be a little bit, I don't know, maybe too fantasy.
Esoteric.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it also, the problem with it, it's almost the same problem that Star Trek always has. Here's my Star Trek reference for, you know, can't do a show without it, right? The problem with it is that it becomes what time travel is to Star Trek, the World Between Worlds could be to Star Wars. The problem is that it could actually be a crutch for them to basically shoehorn different characters in, or maybe to give us stories that maybe would be cool, but, you know, you could just sit there and go, well, you know, it's the World Between Worlds, so we can do it. You have to be careful because it was a cool concept the way that they used it, but it could be misused very easily. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, if you use it to retcon the sequel trilogy, I might be able to get over that. I'm just saying. And then speaking of Stranger Things, of course, you know, I still say that if they ever do that kind of teenage whatever, they need to make Millie Bobby Brown Princess Leia. I would love to see that. That had been brought up a long time ago, and it was one of those things that I never really thought of on my own, but I did start thinking of it later on. Like, wow, that would actually be a really good bit of casting. Well, she's a really good actress, too, which is something else. But, Voyager. He's like, yes, Millie as Leia would be so fun. It would, and it would fit. I mean, she kind of looks similar, right? I mean, and she could pull that off. And what's cool about that is if they were to, it's kind of weird because this gets into another topic that we sometimes include in whatever we're talking about. There's been other times where I think we've actually just talked about it on its own, but it's this whole like de-aging versus recasting thing. I don't know if have we ever actually done a show just on that?
No.
That might be something we should pull out. Like on those weeks where we're like, man, I don't know what we're going to talk about this week. That would be a good one.
Monday.
Oh yeah, we don't have anything for Monday, do we?
Nope.
All right. There you go. You heard it. Monday night. Monday night. De-aging versus recasting. That's what we're going to talk about. Wow, that was cool. Right? But, and
Love
I
it
guess
when a plan comes together.
I guess I'll talk about this more Monday now, but it's one of those things that you do have to weigh what you do. Like, what would probably best serve that story. I'll probably repeat this on Monday, actually. Because on one hand, it might be better off if you just recast everybody or you just de-age everybody. The problem would come in if you tried to, like, de-age half the cast and then, you know, recast the other half. Because, and again, I know you and I have talked about this before. If they keep going, I can see them trying to remake the original trilogy.
I mean, they were trying to remake everything else.
Well, I mean, I could just, yeah, well, see, so normally in Hollywood, they're doing that simply because, you know, they want to make money, and it's a guaranteed moneymaker, right? But, I mean, there would be, and look, the original trilogy stands as probably one of the best films ever, right? I mean, to remaking it would really serve more of a functional purpose than an artistic one. And, I mean, that's the reason why I think that as long as they didn't... So I would be okay with it down the line as long as they didn't get rid of the original. See, that's what I don't like. What I don't like is when they remake something and then suddenly the original's out of print or something. But I think that in Star Wars, because this thing is expanding so much and they're having to constantly retcon and redo and all that stuff, I could see them down the line going, look, we're just going to have to remake the original trilogy. But they have to be very careful. Very, very, very careful if they do that.
Yeah, I don't see them doing that one because I think that would completely, like, you're talking about dividing fans.
Well, I don't
would annihilate it.
And again, I don't think that it would happen anytime soon. I think that this is a down the line because of enough story. They're not there yet. They're not there yet. Like, they'll remake the sequel trilogy before the original because you already have the Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, Last Command, which everybody loved. I mean, they could get away with that because people don't generally like the sequel trilogies. So you start remaking a beloved classic, though. And again, just to clarify, before the comments start to come in, I'm talking about way down the line once they have the stockpile of stories. Voyager says, do you think Hayden talking about Padme and Natalie during the Kenobi press tour means anything, or is it just a coincidence? Okay, so this is something that Voyager sent. He sent me a bunch of stuff on our Twitter of these, like, 1 to 2 minute, 3 minute clips of Hayden Christensen in interviews during the Obi-Wan press tour of him talking about Padme and talking about Natalie Portman and how he would love to work with her again and just the character and everything. And in viewing them, look, it's kind of like what Daryl's been saying this whole time, right? You can't really tell one story without the other. That's why we're talking about this whole Padme thing now, is that Padme without Anakin would be a little strange. And the other thing, by even bringing the Padme character into the Star Wars universe, it would be it made even the whole Vader thing a little odd. I mean, we knew, okay, yeah, Obi-Wan, because I remember when the original trilogy came out, and for a number of years after that, we knew that they had fought on this lava planet or something, and Anakin, you know, fell in and was critically injured, and that's how he got his suit. Lucas established that, like, right around either between A New Hope and Empire or Empire and Return of the Jedi. I don't remember which. But one of those he talked about. So we knew that, and we knew that was a motivator. The Padme thing, though, the love interest, all that stuff driving him to ultimately turn to the dark side, that's something Lucas came up with, obviously, for the prequels. Well, once you do that, now you're thinking to yourself, like, man, you know, and Vader's kind of Vadering around over here. is he actually like, missing his baby? You know what I mean? It's kind of like it sort of puts this weird, like, oh, he was kind of, you know what I mean? It puts this weird spin on things. And
Well, yeah, I mean,
inexorably links these two characters.
yeah, exactly. I mean, especially like I said, when you see it in the comics, how much he's reflected, how much he, I mean, because it's one thing, and see, that's the thing. It's kind of like this weird, tragic love story between those two, almost like a Romeo and Juliet. Once again, another story trope. But see, unlike him losing his mother, which was his first foray into his dark path. Really.
Yeah, Anakin's not really good with women.
Yeah, so it's like, okay, first him, not being strong enough or good enough in his mind to save his mother. The thing that makes the whole thing about him and Padme so crazy and tragic was that, like, he was trying to prevent her from dying, and he ended up being the cause of her death.
Right.
That's what makes it so tragic. It's like,
I'm
trying to prevent
poetic,
this.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to prevent this thing, and I'm really the catalyst behind your whole death anyway. And he never saw it coming, and now that he has to look back and reflect on that, it's like, okay, he knew she was pregnant. So not only did I lose my wife, but he thought he lost his children or his child as well. And that's another part of it, so it's like the loss from Padme is such a significant part of him in his life as Vader. And then of course, he's been duped by Palpatine, and everything like that. Like every person he's ever really loved, Obi-Wan included, like they're no longer part of him anymore. And so he really truly feels alone out here. So I mean, that would make more sense to really have a to have a Vader centric show and then have him lamenting over, yeah, I should have done things a little bit better.
Right.
I'm sorry, like him just really going through that.
Well, and I think that ultimately what you're getting to is, again, something that you brought up at the top of the show, is that these two characters are linked.
Mm-hmm. They're linked. Yeah. You can't have them without each other because they've been linked since day one. I mean, like, are you an angel? I mean, from that point on,
man, was that was one of the dumbest. What?
I know.
Really? What even does that mean? I mean, it's like,
yeah. You're 5. Shut up. But but that's what I'm saying. Like from that point on, oh, you're a funny little guy or a funny little boy, whatever. And then it's like from that point, then you see him like, like, yeah, I can't stop thinking about you constantly. And he's making fruit flow across the table and feeding her. I mean, like I said, like they really haven't been separate except for that time between Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. And the fact at Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, yeah, there's a lot of growth that happened there. But once again, Natalie Portman is too old to go back and play in that space.
That's my biggest concern.
Quite frankly, especially if you're doing it on the TV show budget, we already see what they already did with Anakin. Like, okay, you're on the TV show budget. Like, you can't even get ships for Coruscant.
Yeah,
and you can't de-age Hayden Christensen.
That's my problem. Is that if they try to do this on a TV budget, it's like, okay, look, Hayden Christensen still looked 40 to me. I don't know what you de-aged exactly. I mean, so there is that. That's a genuine
they didn't
concern.
Even fix the lightsaber part, which a lot of people probably didn't catch.
I know. It's one of those.
When Obi-Wan, the prop, it was just like, okay, did you switch it out?
They just, I guess.
Yeah,
there's a lot of concerns, and again, I think that what Voyager was talking about, which is these clips, I probably should have tried to. Well, you actually have the account. You can get into the account. I should have alerted you to it so you could have gone in and watched them. But I mean, basically, it was just there's a lot of the stuff that we saw during Celebration too, right? Where he was just talking about it, and I think that it's coincidence. I don't think that it means anything other than what we've been talking about, that these two characters are very much linked together. And the other thing that you have to look at too with these is that you have two of the three main prequel cast reunited. That would almost be like if Mark Hamill and Harrison Ford had reunited in a Star Wars film. You'd be like, well, where's Carrie Fisher? Where's Princess Leia? Are we going to... You start to have those questions. So when you get Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen back, it naturally leads to Natalie Portman. Now, one of the things that I think was surprising for me is the fact that Natalie Portman seems to be warmed up to actually returning to, well, any blockbuster type film like this, but especially Star Wars. Voyager says, yeah, I love the Obi-Wan show, but it didn't look expensive for some reason. Well, it didn't look expensive because it wasn't. See, The Mandalorian and even the Book of Boba Fett, I think, were actually filmed more on film budgets, right? Like, they cost like something stupid like $10 million an episode or whatever. So you could see that. Whereas, for some reason, Obi-Wan, which is arguably the most important, like way more important than The Mandalorian, or even the Book of Boba Fett. It's like, okay, this is telling a time period that's very important to fans that includes a lot of characters, including Vader. It's like, really? This is the show you're going to cheese out on?
Yep, $79.99 an episode.
Right. Exactly. It's like, what are you thinking? But I don't know.
Yeah.
So it's going to be really interesting to see ultimately what they come up with as far as where Padme is going to land on this stuff. I mean, again, she could end up being, it could be an animated thing, like what we were just saying. It could be a live action thing that takes place during the Clone Wars, maybe. Although there'd be a lot of de-aging going on. It could be more than likely what I think you brought up earlier, where it could be like on Ahsoka or something like that. Maybe part of another show, which would be nice. Because honestly, unless they do something in flashback with a season 2 of Obi-Wan, which goes into almost like a different variation of your Darth Vader-centric series. And you know what? She wouldn't even have to be in that much of it, right? I mean, look at Liam Neeson. I mean, he didn't pop up till almost the very last scene of the... I think it was the last scene of the show. And so you could have said, oh, Liam Neeson's returning to Star Wars as Qui-Gon. Well, he was in one scene, said one line or two, and that's all you really needed. So this big return to Star Wars could just be something as simple as that. Yeah, I shot a little flashback scene, said like 3 sentences, and collected my money and left. I mean, you know what I'm saying? So,
yep.
I don't know. Got any final thoughts on this?
And this is one of those things we just have to wait and see, honestly.
Yeah, we say that a lot. That's kind of the big theme of Star Wars, unfortunately, is, it's just like, well, here's what we think, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. All right. Well,
all right.
The important thing, obviously, is what do you guys think? So you guys heard us yapping about this for the last hour or so. The question is, do you think that Natalie Portman should return? It's something I basically put in the chat right in the very beginning. And if so, how do you think she'll return as Padme? Where do you think it's going to be an animated show? Do you think it's going to be a series? What are your thoughts on this? We really want to know. Like I said, we always respond to this stuff. Sometimes it takes a while, but generally we respond to every comment that's left on the channel. And of course, don't forget to hit that like button, because that like button really helps the channel, and we really want to bring more content to you guys. Hit the subscribe button. If you haven't already subscribed to us, now would be a good time. We're live every Monday and Wednesday, every Monday and Friday at 8. And this Monday, it looks like we're going to be talking about the de-aging versus recasting. Which is better, which is more appropriate, which would fit which projects. I mean, we can get into a whole bunch of stuff on this one. So
we probably will.
And I'm sure we will. And hopefully you guys will join us when we do. So with that, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the force be with you, always.